The reason I got my job at Apple was nepotism. There's a lesson there. The lesson is that it is not how you get your job, it's what you do once you get the job. That is a very important message to your listeners, that don't be all proud about how you got to get in through the front door and you got to have merit and all that. Just get the freaking hell into the company and then prove yourself later. I would also make the case that the flip side of that lesson is that once you get into the company, nobody gives a shit about your degree, about who you know, etc., etc. You either are delivering or you're not.
Hi, I'm Nick Hague, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Guy Kawasaki is the Chief Evangelist of Canva, host of the Remarkable People podcast, and Executive Fellow of the Haas School of Business. Guy has been a brand ambassador of Mercedes-Benz and a trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation. However, Guy is probably best known for pioneering the role of Chief Evangelist for Apple, working alongside Steve Jobs to play a significant role in marketing Apple's Macintosh in the early days, and engaging with software developers and encouraging them to create applications for the Macintosh to create the ecosystem we know today. On top of all this, he's a Silicon Valley venture capitalist investing in and advising many companies, and in his spare time he's written 17 books. Today, I'm delighted to be talking to Guy about his latest book, Wiser Guy, which is an inspiring collection of stories designed to help guide you through life and work. There really is so much to talk about today. As always, if you like what you hear, then please do like, follow, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen, as it really does make a difference to the work we're doing with this podcast. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Guy.
Yeah, thank you very much. You sure you got the right guy? Because I don't consider myself one of the world's greatest business thinkers. I didn't write Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm Poor Dad, Poor Dad.
No, well, you definitely do belong in that camp, well, I think from what we'll discuss today, then it's it'll be evident to the listeners that you are in good company here. So, well, first things first. I know we had to cancel the recording last week because of your back, and I've had a back injury. So, I presume you haven't been out on the surf in Hawaii this morning, then?
Yeah, well, so listen to this. So I go out surfing. I came to Hawaii before my wife. I go out surfing the morning that I'm picking her up from the airport. I pull my sciatica. The waves were 10 to 12 inches, not feet. So I pull my back and I was able to pick her up. But then, the next day I could barely walk. And that was 8 days ago. And I'm taking muscle relaxers and corticosteroids and, everything. And I'm in pain, but, anybody can give an interview when you're feeling great. It takes a really good person to give an interview when you're in pain. So we're about to see what I can do.
Well, I'm going to keep an eye on you, Guy. I'm going to make sure that we run as quick as we can, because sitting in one position, and if you need to stand, then please, you just do that.
If you see tears start streaming from my eyes, you know that it's time to wrap it up here.
We're here, Guy, to talk about your latest book, Wiser Guy, that you can see on the shelves. But before we do, it'd be really great if you could just give our listeners just a quick background to your illustrious career.
All right. So I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. I went to school on the mainland. Because I was Asian American, my parents wanted me to be a doctor, lawyer, or dentist. And so I started off pre-med, and I went to one class where you toured the hospital at Stanford, and I fainted on the first day. So I figured, medical is out. And then I read an article that dentists have the highest incidence of suicide. So there goes dentistry. So all that was left was law. So I applied to law school. I got in. I went for 2 weeks and I quit because I couldn't stand it. So, that was let's just say it wasn't the most auspicious start to my career. So then I went back to school to get an MBA because I really wanted to be in business. So I did that. And then while I was there, believe it or not, I worked for a jewelry manufacturing company, schlepping diamonds and counting diamonds. And then, so I'm in this jewelry business. I graduate, I get my MBA, I go back to that company and work for them while my friends were going to McKinsey and BCG and Bain and all that, Wells Fargo. So I started in the jewelry business and I learned how to sell in that business, which was very good. And then my friend from school, he recruited me into Apple. So I am living proof that nepotism can work out well, because I certainly didn't have the qualifications on paper. It's not like the Apple recruiter said, "Oh, we need somebody with a jewelry background who majored in psychology because that was the easiest major he could find." And here we have Guy Kawasaki. He's perfect for this job. Uh, in fact, I'll tell you a little story so that after I did my interviews at Apple, Steve Jobs said to the guy who hired me, Mike Boych, he said, "Well, what do you think?" And Steve said, you can hire him if you want, but if he fails, I'm going to fire you too." So that was my ringing endorsement to start in the Macintosh division. So anyway, I did get hired into Macintosh division. I was a second software evangelist. My job was to convince people to write Macintosh software and create Macintosh hardware. I stayed there for about 4 years. I left Apple, started a software company, came back to Apple as Apple's chief evangelist, left that, became a venture capitalist. And then I became a writer and a speaker. And fast forward, I became the chief evangelist of Canva about 11 years ago. And today I am chief evangelist of Canva. I am a podcaster with the podcast Remarkable People. I also am an author. I kind of lost track. I think I've written 18 books, something like that. You said that Wiser Guy is my latest book, but by the time this comes out, the latest book will be a book called Everybody Has Something to Hide. And that's a book about how and why to use signals. So that's a very quick summation of my career.
Well, yeah, in fact, in my introduction, I said 17, but I wasn't including that latest one. So you're right. It's you're on top of 18 there. And I mean, where you have the time to spend, I love your podcast, by the way. I'm a subscriber to that. And
Yeah.
in this book, there's so many stories that you share, from life and from business. There aren't many people's careers that spanned Apple, Google, Wikipedia, Canva, Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah.
So it was a tricky podcast, this, to generate questions for, because actually there's so many stories and learnings in Wiser Guy that I need 3 hours to do it justice. But
You could have just gone to Kawasaki GPT and said, what should I ask Guy in a podcast? Because that would actually work, because Kawasaki GPT is for real. You go to Kawasaki GPT, and the data set for that LLM is all my writing, my speaking, my videos, my transcripts. Everything is in there. Kawasaki GPT is better at being Guy Kawasaki than Guy Kawasaki is at being Guy Kawasaki. And
well,
honestly, okay,
I don't.
I am not making this up. I go to Kawasaki GPT and I ask myself questions.
Well, I actually didn't know about Kawasaki GPT,
Well,
so
see.
it's coming from the hard work of doing the digging and reading the books to put these questions together. I think a good starting place, Guy, is with Apple, because not as many people talk openly about their time at Apple as you do, and you share many stories, including when you told Steve Jobs that you didn't trust him. What's the number one piece of wisdom you'd take from your time at Apple?
Oh my God, it's hard to narrow that down. I think if the overarching lesson that I learned from Apple is that design truly matters. I mean, Apple is Apple because of its design. And many people believe that, user interface is not that big a deal, that the human experience isn't that big a deal. But I would make the case that Apple has proven that enough people care about design. Now, I cannot make the case that everybody cares about design. That explains why Windows is a success and Android is a success. But enough people care about design so that you can be a successful company. Yeah, I think that is one of the main lessons I learned from Apple, that design counts.
Yeah. Well, I'm an Apple advocate. I'm speaking here on an Apple laptop, phone, you name it, then I've got it. So I'm definitely bought into the brand and therefore the design and the aesthetics that sit around it. Um, I mean, there's not many people that leave Apple and go back again. In fact, I think you've said, well, it's just you and Steve that has ever left and then gone back to Apple. Can you
Well,
share any specific experience or lesson you learned from Steve Jobs that continues to influence your work today?
well, I have a whole 1 hour podcast on all the lessons I learned from Steve Jobs. But, well, I mean, I kind of mentioned the first one already, that design matters. A second lesson I learned is that, if you get people to believe in your dream of increasing people's creativity and productivity, once you get people believing in your dream, it's also easy to get them into believing to buy your computer or your phone. So if you start with the philosophical level, it gets easier and easier, as opposed to ramming your computer or phone down their throat.
Yeah.
Uh, the third thing I would say I learned from Steve Jobs is that, the only thing that truly matters is a person's competence and the person's ability. You should just ignore people's gender, sexual orientation, religion, skin color. All that stuff is superficial. All you should really care about is the person a great person, a great kind of employee.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that comes through. There's lots of people's stories in the book that I'd like to touch on today, Guy. I mean, specific to Steve, you talk in the book about having to prove yourself every day, that he demanded this excellence, but it kept you at the top of your game, and it wasn't always easy to work. Sometimes unpleasant and sometimes scary. You say, but it
It
drove
was
the kind
never
of
easy.
work.
But I tell you something, I consider it an honor that I got to work for Steve Jobs. And I don't know anybody who worked for Steve Jobs who said, that was a wasted time of my career. I didn't learn anything. It was just traumatic. It was traumatic, but it was a very valuable time. I would not be where I am were it not for Steve Jobs. I might still be selling diamonds right now. Yeah, I really, I am so thankful for being able to work for Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I say, there's so many stories around your time at Apple. But one thing that's really interesting is how you first came to work for Apple, because the importance of relationships and opening doors and the importance of grasping opportunities in life when you can is really important. You talk about that in the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, I alluded to that a few minutes ago, that the reason I got my job at Apple was nepotism. I mean, there, and actually, there's a lesson there. The lesson is that it is not how you get your job, it's what you do once you get the job.
Yeah.
And so that is a very important, I think, message to your listeners, that don't be all proud about, how you got to get in through the front door and you got to like have merit and all that. Just get the freaking hell into the company and then prove yourself later. I would also make the case that the flip side of that lesson is that once you get into the company, nobody gives a shit about your degree, about who you know, et cetera, et cetera. You either are delivering or you're not.
Yeah.
And then a third lesson from that is, it doesn't matter what level you get into a company, like if you start off as the receptionist, you could end up as the CEO. So don't be all hoity toity and figure like, yeah, I got this Harvard undergraduate degree. I need to start at such a level. I deserve it. I'm entitled to this kind of position. I wouldn't be proud. I would just get in and prove yourself from there.
I think three wise lessons there, Guy, and too much people these days, do feel it's their right, their privilege to walk into these jobs. I think the lessons I took from it is keep your eyes open. You never know who you'll meet that'll shape your future. And I think a great example of that is Madison. You're co-producer of the podcast and co-author. You met her while surfing, and look where that took her.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is literally a true story. I met Madison while surfing in Santa Cruz, and um, I have to tell you that she is one of the smartest people I have ever met. And I have a theory that behind every successful man is an amazing woman, and I am lucky because I have my wife and Madison behind me. So that's why I am where I am.
That's why you're unstoppable. Yeah, no, thankfully, I couldn't have done what I've done in my career without my wife. That's for sure. She keeps everything together, the household and everything else. So Daniel Pink, he was my last guest on the show, and his latest book is The Power of Regret. And in your book, you recall being surprised that most people feel regret about chances they didn't take or the relationships they let drift, as opposed to making that leap of faith and regretting the decision that was made. And so the wisdom you therefore take from this is to be bold and have courage about your convictions. In your book, you share a story of when you didn't go for the interview of CEO as Yahoo. Would that be your biggest regret in your work life?
Well, I would say that is the biggest financial regret. The story is that Michael Moritz from Sequoia, the preeminent venture capital firm, called me up. And I was living in San Francisco with my wife and one son, and we had one more in the chute in beta. And he calls me up and says, we funded a company by Stanford, and it's called Yahoo, and we'd like to know if you want to interview for the position of CEO. And I said, Michael, I'm married, I have one son, I have one more on the way. I just don't want to drive 60 minutes each way. So no, I don't even want to interview. And that interview was for the CEO position of Yahoo. And I did some rough calculations, and let's suppose I got the job, which is a pretty good assumption because when the lead investor asks you to interview, that lead investor has kind of made up his mind. He's not going to ask somebody to interview with somebody he's going to reject, right? So I figure, I would have been the first adult in Yahoo. I probably would have got 4 or 5%. And, 4 or 5% of Yahoo in its prime probably would be $2 billion. So, 2 billion here, 2 billion there. It adds up to real money. Although recently, if you see how billionaires act, it's not clear to me you want to be a billionaire. I have made a very, very serious decision, and I'm going to limit my net worth to $999,999,099. I'm not going to hit the $1 billion mark, and quite frankly, I'm not really in danger of that. So I can sleep fine. I don't want to get billionaire's disease.
No. Well, it's a lot of money, Guy, but you can't put a price on your time with your family. And it's always easy to look back and say, if only, but life moves on. And as Dan Pink says, you need to use your regrets to guide decisions.
Listen, some of these billionaires, if they have the awareness, you think they're going to look back and say, maybe I shouldn't have dedicated my life to ensuring that crypto was successful and that there's long-term capital gains. I mean, what are you going to put on your gravestone? Absolutely. I made crypto successful. I made sure long-term capital gains was low. That's what I did for the world. Cheer me on, right? I mean, what utter bullshit.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Well, and you never know where life takes you neither, because here you are now as chief evangelist of Canva. But that journey was somewhat fortuitous and needed a lot of good fortune and serendipity along the way, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, basically that's the story of my life. So 12 years ago, Twitter, before Twitter became a Nazi platform, I was active on Twitter, and I was working with a woman named Pig Fitzpatrick, and she would be doing the posts for us. And we had this theory that every post should have a picture or a video. So she was using Canva to make these pictures. And I guess Canva noticed that I was using Canva from my Twitter feed, so they reached out to me with an at mention. I happened to see that at mention. I happened to respond. I asked Peg, "Isn't Canva what you use?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Do you like Canva?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Should I help Canva?" She said, "Yes." And so that was my due process. 2 weeks later, they happened to be visiting California. This is before, this is when it was still safe to visit the United States. So they came to the United States. We met, and the rest is history. I think people probably think that Guy could have worked for any company, so he was carefully analyzing hundreds of thousands of companies for the best possible experience and the best possible return on investment, and all of that is untrue. Basically, Canva saw I was using Canva reached out to me. I asked Peg Fitzpatrick what I should do. She said help them. That's it. That's the story of Canva for me.
I love that story. I love it because you never know where life takes you,
You
and
don't.
but equally, I think as well, I think it shows. That was 10, 11 years ago. These things, the people expect overnight success these days, whereas it's in reality that just doesn't happen. There's blood, there's
No.
sweat, there's tears, there's and you never know where it ends up in life.
No, you don't. You really don't. I mean, one of my philosophies is you should always say yes.
Yeah,
Because,
I'm in
I mean,
agreement
if you
with that.
say no, you stop right there. But if you say yes, at least you gain the optionality to see more and more. Right now, the counter argument is that you should focus on a few things, and then I'll tell you a story, a story that uses a more biological process. So the hill behind my house was covered with eucalyptus trees, and eucalyptus trees in California is a very dangerous thing because they burn so well. So in a rational moment, I decided to clear that hillside of all the eucalyptus trees. And fire department loves that, that much less risk. So I think I probably cut down about 300 trees. And then now,
Wow.
so there's this barren hill, and we cannot look like the apocalypse just happened there. So we need to replant native species, of course, which is oaks. So I did all this research about how you plant oaks, and I read that the best way to plant oaks is actually to start from the acorn, not start with a sapling. So I became an acorn expert. I went all over Northern California looking for acorns. You take the acorns. This is going to be more than you want to know about oaks, but anyway, you take the acorns, you put them in water. The ones that float are dead. You throw those away. You take the ones that sink. You put them in a container. You put a cloth over them. You add water. You put them in your refrigerator. So you're faking them out that they're going through winter. And then in the spring, you let them, they sprout. You take the sprouts, you put them in the ground, and you cross your fingers, and you wait 20 years, and maybe you'll get an oak. But I can tell you, I did that, and I started with about 400 acorns, and right now I have 4 viable saplings.
Oh
So
no.
the odds are 1 out of 100 that an acorn that you pick is going to become a sapling. I hope they all survive. But the point is, it's 1 out of 100. Now, if I were smart, I could tell you, yeah, of these 400, I only need to plant those 4 because those are the 4. And it's just not true. It's the law of big numbers. So, you got to take 100 shots to find one.
Yeah, no, it's a numbers game, isn't it?
It
We
is
we
a
talked
numbers game.
we talked about your time at Apple, where you were famously evangelized the Macintosh. How have the principles of evangelism changed now with Canva in the age of social media and AI compared to in the 80s?
Yeah. So when I was evangelizing Macintosh the first time, this is if you had a fax machine, that was a big deal. If you had email, that was an even bigger deal. Maybe you were on CompuServe. If you, well, I mean, basically, it was all hand to hand combat. You got on a plane with your prototype, or the developer came to you. There was none of this social media stuff, none of these, YouTube videos and all that. So it was much, much less leverage. the social media and internet has made so many tools available to an evangelist. Well, that's the good news. That's the good news. The bad news is, yeah, now there's so many more tools that everybody can flood everything with sales, marketing, and evangelism. So there's much more noise. um, so yeah, there's good news and bad news, and now this is even before AI. Now with AI, now that you really have a lot of competition for bandwidth and mind share. I'm glad I'm not an evangelist, today. Well, Canva's already successful, so yeah, I'm just gonna live off my past.
Well, talking of your past, Guy, there's a famous quote. Be nice to people on your way up because you'll meet them on your way down.
Yeah.
Used a lot of times in business, but it is true, and you never knew who you meet on your business journey and how they might help you out. And you have a story in your book about giving an intern a job who then went on to be worth 9.3 billion. It's quite a story.
All right. So the story you're alluding to is that I gave a freshman from USC his first job in the summer between his freshman and sophomore year. And his name was Marc Benioff. So we hired Marc Benioff to write assembly language sample programs to show Macintosh developers this is how you use an assembler to write Macintosh applications. So that was Marc Benioff's first job. Now you fast forward, and he's a billionaire. He's the CEO of Salesforce, and he's like the man. But he started as the intern, and I think he's the only intern I ever hired. So I'm one for one, and I'm quitting. I'm gonna bat 1,000 and say, yeah, every intern I ever hired became a billionaire. That is factually true. That is
Yeah,
factually
yeah.
true.
What I love about the story, Guy, is these people as they rise through the echelons, and very successful. He's not only a very generous philanthropist, as you'd imagine, with that kind of money, but he still answers emails, and you hadn't spoken to him, I don't think, since '85, and your emails passed, and he actually he got your son on the employment ladder, I think, through answering. So I mean, it
Well,
is.
he got my son on the Salesforce employment ladder. He also got Mike Boych, the guy who hired me into the Macintosh division. He got his son on the employment ladder. So, um, I gotta say that after you're a billionaire, you may tend to forget who helped you when you were a freshman in college and gave you an internship, but not Marc Benioff. Marc Benioff, to his credit, he took care of us. And, you know, I don't know. I guess maybe Elon Musk took care of interns too, but I don't, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. You gave a full chapter in your book to innovation, and you recall stories from Reebok, Toyota, Kodak. But my favorite one is about how to be or what a mission-driven asshole is. Um, and this comes from Tony. Well, for the listener, Tony Fadell, inventor of iPod, the iPhone, Nest thermostat. Um, we talked about this mission driven asshole and what one is, and was Steve Jobs one or not? Could you expand on that story?
Yeah, well, okay. So just for clarity, I'm not saying that Tony Fadell was a mission-driven asshole.
No.
I'm talking about in his interview, he explained that Steve Jobs was a mission-driven asshole. So listen, I've been in Silicon Valley for about 50 years now, so I am an expert in assholes. Not the proctology sense, but the emotional sense. I have come across many assholes in Silicon Valley. Now, 99.999% of assholes, they are focused on themselves, that the company is for glorification of me. The company's about me. The process is about me. I have my administrative assistant who has an administrative assistant. My PR firm has a PR firm. My chauffeur has a chauffeur. It's like all about me. And those people, they are self-driven egomaniac assholes. Steve Jobs was not like that. He was mission-driven asshole, and mission-driven asshole means that you have a higher calling. So basically, Steve wanted to create the greatest computer, and you were either part of the solution or you were part of the problem. And if you were part of the problem, he had no time for you and he treated you like an asshole. On the other hand, if you're part of the solution, you're inside the tent. And I think that if you have to be an asshole, you should be a mission driven asshole, not an ego driven asshole. So the easy part of this is being the asshole. The hard part is being driven by a great product or service, not your ego.
Yeah, yeah. And it was all because he didn't want mediocre, did he? He expected greatness, and that was the reason. Yeah. So as we look to the future, what's the next thing you want to learn or get better at then, Guy? What does being a wiser guy look like for you in the next decade?
Well, at a very basic level, the thing that I have not accomplished in my life, and I hope I accomplish before I die, is the ability to cross step onto the nose of my surfboard and hang 10. And that is you you would be amazed at how much mental bandwidth I give to that goal. That is really an obsession of mine. Surfing is the hardest thing that I've ever tried to learn. I don't recommend you start at 60. That is a little late. So, there's that. Uh, I love my podcast. I believe my podcast is almost a moral duty that because I have access to people and I have the context to know what to ask, I have a moral obligation to do a podcast. And finally, I am still writing books, and I just completed another book that's going to be out in 5 days because I believe that this tool called Signal is essential for the preservation of democracy in America, and everybody should be using Signal at this point to preserve their privacy.
So is this the book that's just to be released on Kindle? Everybody Has Something to Hide. Is that the one that you're talking about, Guy?
Yeah.
And so, well, two questions on that to finish up. Firstly, I've written 2 books, so it's time-consuming task. I know that, but how do you find the time to write 18? But secondly, just can you give us a bit more background on what the new book's about?
Okay, so I have asked myself that question because in 1987, I wrote my first book called The Macintosh Way. So that is, let me do the math, 87, 97, 13, it's 38 years ago. Okay, so when I wrote that first book, I said, this is the first and last book I'm ever going to write because I have nothing to say. So now I have said this is my last book 17 times over 38 years. So I average a book every 2 years or so. And I have very strong feelings about writing a book. I think many people view a book as a means to an end. They want to write a book to position themselves as a visionary, as a thought leader, to increase their consulting, increase their speeches, increase their, blah, blah, blah. I believe that a book is a work of art and it is an end in itself. So you don't write a book to get to another point. You write a book because the book is the end point. It is the goal. So that's number one. And, when you read these books called Joe Shett Way of Sales, published by Joe Shett Press. I mean, that ain't about a piece of art. That is because that person wants to get more gigs, right? So that's number one. And number two is I think that you should write a book only when you have something to say. What a concept. like people write a book not because they have something to say, but as a means to an end. So this particular book, which I'm going to tell you the 18th time, this is the last book I'm ever going to write. But this book it's a confluence of, well, I think in the current political climate that it is necessary to protect your privacy. So that is like the overarching, need to protect your privacy. And when I first learned about Signal about a year ago, I started using it and I immediately loved it. I am really, really familiar with messaging and email. And when I saw how Signal was created and the design and all that, I really loved it. Even without all the encryption and privacy, it is a very well done messaging client. So there's that. And then I just I think that social media is basically useless anymore. That you're either preaching to the converted or you're preaching to Russian bots, and so neither of that is really useful. So I thought, what can I do to help society? And I think that by writing a book about Signal, I can help people embrace this tool that will preserve their privacy, which will make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So that's why I wrote this book called Everybody Has Something to Hide.
Yeah. Well, like you say, this world that we live in now, privacy really does matter. So it sounds like a fascinating book, and how we can reclaim that privacy for us personally. I mean, last year I was informed that my personal data was part of a data breach from my previous company I worked for. So I'll search out the book on the Kindle, Guy, and it's something that I think we all need to read.
Well, and you'll love this. The suggested retail price is going to be $4.04 because 404 is what you see when a page and the information is not available. So I said, like, what would be a clever price for this? So it's 404. Now, if there's ever a printed version on paper, the price will be $17.76 based on the 250th anniversary of America. I hope we get there. It's not clear that we will. I mean, we still got 6 months to make it. I'll tell you a funny story. So this book was going to be Signal for Dummies. It was going to be for the Dummies series, right?
Yeah.
So Wiley gives me a contract for the book, and I said, all right, so one thing I'm stipulating in this contract is the price is going to be $17.76. And they say to me, we always price, get this, we always price for dummies books ending in 99 cents. And I said, well, why is that? Did God tell you that? Did Moses tell you that? Did Buddha tell you that? Who told you that? Like, well, where is that? Is that in the Bible? Is that in the, I don't know, tabernacle? I mean, where is that? And they said, no, that's just our practice. Every price has to end in 99 cents. So I walked from that deal for 23 cents because it was going to be 17.76 or not 17.99. So for 23 cents, I walked away from this book being Signal for Dummies.
Well, you've always been a man of principle, Guy. So I mean,
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say always.
Well, to conclude, I like to finish just with a handful of questions that I always ask all my guests. So my previous guest always asks the current guest. So as I've alluded to, Daniel Pink has a question for you from last time. So he said, what's the one thing that people believe to be true about marketing but isn't true?
What's the one thing that people believe about marketing that isn't true? I would say, well, there's many things, but I would say that they believe that a big budget is necessary. Yeah. I don't believe that's true. I actually think too much money is worse than too little for marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. The creativity goes out the window then, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then, pretty soon you hire an agency. Pretty soon you're running a Super Bowl commercial. And, pretty soon you're hiring an influencer.
Yeah. Just a couple of questions from the listeners now. So firstly, we're going to go to Pakistan. From Mariam Hafiz, and she says, what do you think true evangelism looks like today when everyone online is already selling something?
Well, the difference between evangelism and most of what you see online in terms of sales and influencers is that An evangelist has the other person's best interest at heart, not just his or her best interest. So when I tell you to use Macintosh, when I tell you to use Canva, when I tell you to use Signal, well, in the first two cases, it is good for me. Well, even with Macintosh, I only own 4 shares of Apple, so it doesn't really matter to me. So, but when I was an Apple employee and I am a Canva employee, when I tell you to use Canva and Macintosh, it is not because it's good for me. It is because it is good for you. Don't get me wrong. It is also good for me, but that's not the motivation. It's because it's good for you. Now with Signal, Signal is a not-for-profit. I have no financial relationship with them. It doesn't matter to me financially if Signal is successful. So that in that case, it is not just good for you. It is completely good for you. It's not particularly good for me because it doesn't matter to me. And when you price your book at $4.04, and then for the first 5 days, when my book comes out on January 28th, if you order it on January 28th, it's free for 5 days. You can get it for free. If you pre-order it right now, it's a long story, but right now it's the lowest price it can be, which is 99 cents, because you cannot make a book free before it's released. So all the pre-orders go out at the price that you set, which is the lowest it can be, 99 cents. And then the next day, the promotion kicks in and the price goes to $4.04, but it's free. It's a long story, but
Well, there you go, listeners. I mean, we've timed this right because this is going out on the 29th. So when you're listening
Oh,
to this,
perfect.
they
Perfect.
can jump on the offer and take it up, Guy.
Yeah. I listen. I want everybody to have this book. I really believe privacy is important, and we put a lot of effort into translating it into Spanish. Spanish version will be out in February because I think the Spanish population, the Hispanic population, really needs to be concerned about their privacy.
Yeah. My second question is from Jay Miller. He's in San Francisco, and he asks, who's been your most influential mentor in your career, and what key lessons did you learn from them?
Oh, well, there's two factors there. So one is the assumption that a person was a formal mentor, and I'm going to take that off the table. I've had like two mentors. One was the general counsel of Apple. His name was Al Eisenstadt. Another is Marty Gruber, who was the CEO of the jewelry company. So they were really mentors to me. But I will tell you that the person I probably learned the most from, even that is a two-way tie. I would say the two people who most influenced me are Steve Jobs and Jane Goodall. I think Jane Goodall may be the most remarkable person I've ever known.
Yeah, and she had a remarkable life, didn't she? Sadly, we lost her last year, I think it was, wasn't it? But I loved the episode on your podcast with her. It was a fantastic episode. So do go and listen to that one too, listeners. So 3 more questions. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of business advice I've ever been given is do not ask people to do something you yourself would not do. And, this is like, when you sign up for a new service and they put you through CAPTCHA and they say, all right, so here's 9 pictures, click on every picture with a bus in it. And you're like, click on it. I said, no, you're wrong. So now click on every picture with a motorcycle in it. No, you're wrong. Click on every picture with a traffic light in it. And no, you're wrong. Like after 3 times, you're trying to verify that you are who you are and you still cannot do it. Like, you don't like to do that. Why do you put your customers through that? So that's. Do not ask people to do something you don't want to do, whether it's CAPTCHA. If it's your employees and you're in Silicon Valley, but your programming is in Mumbai, and you're telling your software managers you need to fly coach to Mumbai, but when you fly to Mumbai, you fly first. That's bullshit too. I mean, everybody goes first or everybody goes coach. That's why I would never have developers far away. I ain't flying coach. So anyway. Uh,
who would you like me to reach out to, Guy? Who would you like to hear on the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast in the future?
ah, let's see. You mean I should suggest a guest for you? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, if you can get her, I think that Meredith Whittaker, the president of Signal, would be a great interview. Yeah,
Sounds good. Sounds good. I
she's
might need your help to reach out to Meredith.
yeah.
But
All righty. What else?
no, and well, the final question, because I always pass on to the next guest. So my next guest is Richard Shotton, who I know, Guy, you're going to love, because I regularly listen to Remarkable People, your podcast, and I listen to. Well, I know you have a real interest in behavioural economics, because I loved your discussion with Richard Thaler. So Richard Shotton, he's also a world-renowned behavioural psychologist, and his latest book is called Hacking the Human Mind. What question would you like to pose to him?
Okay, so this is a question. It's really, I mean, I could make the case it's literally a $1 trillion question.
Right.
And the $1 trillion question is, how does any AI company foster brand loyalty to their LLM? Because the switching costs, like, I don't know about you, but I switch between ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and all that. It's like, nah, they're just bookmarks, and
Yeah.
so I can't tell you that. Yeah, I can tell you why you should use Gemini or ChatGPT in this particular case and all that. So I don't know. And then Apple just, they did a deal with Google to have Gemini inside of Apple AI. So that's one way to foster, brand loyalty. But if okay, so let's say that happens. So now all my AI on my Apple devices is Gemini. I still have the Chat GPT application. I would still use it. So how do you get, I can understand why people are loyal to Macintosh. They're loyal to iPhone. They're loyal to Android. They're loyal to Windows. They're loyal to Linux. I don't know how people become loyal to an LLM.
Well, that's a great question, and I'll definitely pose it to Richard. And of course, you've got Kawasaki GPT to throw into
Well,
the
there's
mix as
that,
well.
yes.
So. Guy, I love your podcast. I love doing this podcast because I get to talk to incredible people like yourself, which in turn definitely makes me a wiser guy. You see what I did there? Hopefully, the listeners will take away from our conversation today that there's no one size fits all formula for success. Therefore,
Yeah.
you won't always make the right choices in
Yeah.
life. But as long as you stay humble, curious, work hard, stay open minded, then new opportunities will come your way, and
Yeah.
you won't go far wrong.
Well,
If
and just do not dedicate your life to making crypto successful and long-term capital gains tax. Don't make that the focus of your life.
Amen, amen. If listeners are interested in your latest books, they're available everywhere. Or if they want to learn more about what you do, where should they go, Guy?
Ah, a seemingly simple question. If you want to literally ask me questions, you go to Kawasaki GPT. If you want to see, my books, it's all on Amazon. Um, Even though there's a $40 million movie, it's not about me. But anyway, so yeah, go to Amazon. You can get my books. My books are in bookstores too. But this book, Everybody Has Something to Hide, is Kindle only because I wanted something that I could manipulate the price really easily and revise as signal changes, and also price it with the last two digits not being 99.
Well, in fact, there's a lot of discussions I'm going to have with Richard around behavioral psychology and why things are priced the way that they are. So that's for the next podcast. So tune in
Okay.
for that one. Guy, it's been a special treat to speak to you today. I know you've been smiling all the way through it, and I know you're in pain. So please keep taking that medicine, and I hope the back gets better so you can get
All
out on
right.
the surf again.
Thank you very much. All the best to you. Bye bye.
So here are my 3 learnings from speaking to Guy Kawasaki. Firstly, I think he said say yes to everything. Guy recalled the story of when he didn't go for the interview as CEO of Yahoo, but it would have meant he spent a 2-hour commute every day, and he had a young son and another child along the way. That was back in 1995 when Yahoo was being formed. And so with stock options, he talks about maybe 5% of the company, that would have amounted to between 2 and 4 billion at the peak of the company's valuation. That is a lot of money, but I suppose you can't live your life through the lens of regret. Secondly, we talked a lot about his time at Apple and Steve Jobs, who he said was his most influential mentor in his career. He mentioned that he doesn't know of any Macintosh division employee who didn't believe Steve Jobs was a jerk. However, he did caveat that by saying that the fact that he also doesn't know anyone that worked underneath Steve Jobs who didn't think it was an honor, a privilege, and would do it all again if they could. And I think thirdly, it's about connections and making them count in life. Guy talked about how he got his first job at Apple, not through his knowledge of computers, but because of his relationship with his old Stanford classmate, Mike Boych, who put Guy forward to Steve for the job. Likewise, he also talked about giving Marc Benioff his first intern job, who then went on to create Salesforce.com. But he still remembered Guy all those years later, and he even gave his son his first job at Salesforce. His book, Wiser Guy, is packed full of these stories, so I really do recommend you go out and buy this book. Next up, it's Richard Shotton, and he's talking about how to hack the human mind. You will love this episode. So please join me on the next time on the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast.